eastern areas of Syria near Al-Mayadeen, Al-Hasaka, and Abu Kamal. It's estimated by CENTCOM that ISIS militants earn as much as $2 million a day, in part by illegally selling that oil. Now, they produce between 300 to 500 barrels of refined petroleum every day, but just who is buying their oil? Which countries are contributing to their bankroll? And that's exactly the question posed to Secretary of State John Kerry during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing. Kerry said he believed that the oil was being smuggled out through Syrian border countries, naming Turkey and Lebanon. Now, some of those countries are now a part of the very coalition meant to destroy the terror group. So, are these countries partners in battle or partners in crime? Should the international community consider sanctioning states that are seemingly funding and benefiting from the group's access to oil? You know, earlier I was joined by Professor James Galvin. He's a professor of Middle East Studies at UCLA, and that's exactly the question that I posed to him.
Well, there are no state sponsors, really. I mean, what we have is a situation in which we have very porous borders, and these are private entrepreneurs who are buying this oil and shipping it across these borders. Some of the borders are extraordinarily dangerous for the Turks themselves and for the Lebanese. Some of the borders are controlled, for example, in terms of Turkey, by Kurdish militants that the Turkish government has been fighting. So there's very little that we can do in terms of sanctioning the governments themselves when the problem is not the governments per se, it's the government's control over their borders.
Now, as we know, like we said, a huge amount of ISIS funding is coming from that oil. Jim, can you break down for us how ISIS is exploiting those oil resources and how the countries that it's fighting are seemingly benefiting from these cheaper oil prices?
Well, oil has always been a contentious issue in the Middle East in terms of consumers. Most states, for example, subsidize oil, and still oil prices are going higher in these various countries simply because of the economic policies of cutting subsidies. So there's a big market throughout the Middle East now for cheaper oil. We saw this actually brought down the government in Egypt when oil prices made it unavailable to many people. So that's one aspect of what's going on. Another aspect of what's going on is the fact that ISIS has tended to conquer territory in order to exploit the resources. In other words, if you trace exactly where ISIS has set up shop, it's in these areas like Hasaka and places like that that are the centers of oil production. The problem is, of course, that all the various outfits that are now fighting in Syria, and it's estimated that there are about 120,000 fighters on the ground in Syria, that all of them are doing the same thing, conquering swaths of territory and exploiting the resources. And ISIS is getting about $1.5 million a day out of oil, but they also have other operations as well. They're operating like a gang, like the Sopranos. What they're doing is they're shaking down wealthy people, they're charging taxes on Christians under their control, etc. So whatever possible sources of income that they have, they're going to exploit.
Now, many have criticized America's wars in the Middle East, obviously.